What's up guys, Dr. Jared here, and these are the best stretches to alleviate tightness and pain in your hip flexors. Now what is a hip flexor? You've got two muscles that I'm going to help you out with today. One is called your Illiopsoas, and it looks just like this. You'll see that it actually originates right up here on your lower back, crosses your hip joint, and then connects right into the top of your femur bone right here. And so primarily hip extension is going to stretch that out, but we need to be mindful of where our back is as well. That muscle can actually cause pain in your lower back, and so it's important that we stretch that one out. The other hip flexor is called your Rectus Femoris, and it looks just like this. It's actually one of your quad muscles. It originates right here on the front of your hip, comes down, crosses your knee, and connects into the top of your tibia. We stretch that one not only with hip extension, but we can influence it with the degree of flexion in our knee as well, because it is one of the quad muscles. You'll definitely get both in this video. It's crucial that I mention before we get started that not all pain in this area comes from tightness in your hip flexors. Oftentimes it's weak in that area and overused, and that can cause pain. And a lot of times too, it has to deal with the angle of your pelvis. If you walk around with what we call an anterior pelvic tilt all day, that's a shortening of the hip flexor, of that Illiopsoas muscle, but a lot of times that's due to weakness in your lower abs and in your glutes. Your better option there would be actually to strength train those two areas to alleviate some of that tension and pain. Now, both of those things, tightness versus weakness, and then the lower cross syndrome or the angle of your pelvis, is beyond the scope of what I wanted to cover in this video. This video is just going to be a ton of hip flexor stretches to help you out of that pain. But if you're interested in keeping pain away long term, your better bet might be to address some of those other issues. I've actually got videos that cover both of those things. I'm going to link them at the end of this video, but I've also got them linked down in the description below. So as soon as we get done with some of these stretches, it might be in your best interest to check out some of those videos as well in order to keep pain away long term. But that being said, hip flexor stretches coming at you right now. Step number one is right down here on the floor. Let's start with a massage or a muscle release technique. Now the best way to do that is to get either a softball or lacrosse ball or baseball. I found that a tennis ball or a racquetball, those are usually a little too soft for this area that we're trying to release. So grab one of those balls, and what we're going to do is put that down on the ground. And now I just want to put that right underneath that hip flexor, or right there on the front of the hip. And then what you can do is move your hips side to side and let that ball roll over that tight muscle and that tight tendon. There might be areas that are a little more tender than others. We're going to spend some time on those. But what you should find is, yeah, that might be a little tender at the beginning, but as you keep going on it, as that muscle starts to relax and release, it starts to feel a little bit better. Typically, I tell people spend about 30 seconds on this, no more than about 60 seconds. We don't want to do it too much that it actually aggravates that area, but that's a great place to start. The first stretch we'll jump into is one of my favorites for that Illiopsoas hip flexor. This is going to be a tall kneeling stretch. What I want you to do is get into this tall kneel position. The leg that's down on the ground, in this case it's my left, is the one that we're going to be stretching. In this position, the first step that I want you to do is actually fire and contract your glutes. So you're going to squeeze your butt muscle. That's going to lock your pelvis into a better position to hold the stretch. Fire that glute and then lean forward onto your other leg until we get that good stretch appreciated right here through the front of the hip. That's right where that Illiopsoas muscle is going to go. Now, a lot of times I even like to take this into a couple of different motions. That's kind of my phase one go-to. But if we want more of a stretch, what you can do is contract the glute, come forward onto the foot, and then just lean away from it slightly. And what you'll notice with that is we introduce that side bend into your lower back. That introduces even more of a stretch, more of a pull into that hip flexor area. If you want a phase three, if you want even more than that, what I like to do is get into that same position. So contract the glute, come forward onto the foot, lean away, and now rotate towards. And that's going to basically create as much separation between that lower back attachment and the front of the hip right down here, the lower back origin, and then the front of the hip insertion. So it looks like this. Contract the glute, come forward. There's step one. If you want more, lean away from it. If you want more, rotate towards it. And then what I would do is I would get to where it's a good, comfortable stretch, and then I'd hold that for 20 seconds and repeat that 3 times. Again, that's my favorite stretch for that Illiopsoas muscle, that top kind of hip flexor. If you want to incorporate more of a quad stretch into it and bias more of the rectus femoris, all we need to do is pull a chair into it. I'm going to do my other side. I'm going to give this left side a break for a second. I'm going to pull this chair in. And so now how we would start this is I'm going to put my foot up onto that chair. All of a sudden now I've introduced this knee flexion. It's going to pull a little bit more on that rectus femoris quad muscle. And then everything else looks very similar. And so now I'm going to get my other foot out here into this position. And honestly, for me to even just get into this position, you're going to feel a good stretch through that quad muscle. If you sit back onto your foot, you're going to feel even more of a pull. Most people get that down here into the muscle belly of the quad. What I like to do is if we're going to bias the top of it, let's introduce hip extension with it as well. So again, contract the glute and then slide forward right here. I'm putting my weight onto this left front foot, and oh man, that's where you're going to start to feel it. You'll get that right up here in the top of the quad, but for sure right there on that front of the hip, just like that. Again, I want you to take it to an end range where it feels comfortable. You're going to hold it there for 20 seconds, and then you're going to repeat that one 3 times. Now those first 2 stretches are great examples of static stretching, meaning we're going to get into a position and then hold it for an extended period of time. I also like to use dynamic stretching to stretch the hip flexors as well. That's where we kind of get into the end range and then out of it, and then we're going to do that repeatedly over and over. The 2 ways that I like to do that are with a lunge walk progression and then a split squat actually right here on a bench. This is what they look like. And so with the lunge walk progression, what we're going to do is just take a big step with one leg right now. Because my right leg is behind me, that's the hip flexor I'm going to be stretching out, and then drop down onto that left leg. But you'll see that I'm trying to keep my right leg extended. I'm trying to keep my back extended until I get a good pull right here in the front of that hip flexor. I would hold that for about 1, 2, 3, and then come out of it. And then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. So a nice big step with my right, down into that lunge position, 1, 2, 3, and then come right back out of it. And so as we lunge walk, again, the emphasis right here is just stretching and pulling through the front of the hip, through the front of that hip flexor. And what I would typically do, I do this a lot, like this is like a leg day warm up for me. I'll usually take about 10 steps, 20 steps on each side with again about those 3-second holds at each end range. The last thing that we'll show you is the split squat variation on that. So again, more knee flexion means more rectus femoris, more quad emphasis. What you're going to do is kick one leg up onto the chair or onto a stool, chair, bench behind you. Now, as we drop down into that split squat or into that Bulgarian split squat, I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep my torso upright until I get that good stretch right here through the front of my hip, right down into the quad muscle. Same thing, hold 1, 2, 3, and then use your legs to push right back up out of it. And so we're going to come down, we're going to hold 1, 2, 3, good stretch, and then come right back up out of it. Usually what I do there is I'll do a set of 10 on the right, a set of 10 on the left, and then repeat that 2 or 3 times. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that your hip flexors might be weak and not just tight. If you want help with that, check out this video right here. If you think your posture, your position of your pelvis might be at play, this is the video that I want you to watch right here. If you haven't subscribed to Tone and Tighten yet, hit the circle to do that, and I hope to see you again soon.